From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
At 12:30 p.m. on November 22, 1963, as President John F. Kennedy's motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, at least 8 separate cameras were rolling. Abraham Zapruder's 8mm home movie camera would go on to become the most famous, the one frame-by-frame record most people picture when they think of that day. But Zapruder wasn't alone. An air conditioning engineer named Orville Nix was filming from across the plaza. A dressmaker named Marie Muchmore had her own camera running. A man named Mark Bell captured his own angle. And in at least 3 of those independently shot films, along with several still photographs taken that day, one figure stands out from everyone else in the crowd. Not because of what she did, but because of what she didn't. Dealey Plaza that day produced an unusually large cast of nicknamed, never fully identified bystanders. A man clutching a black umbrella on a clear, sunny afternoon, who became known simply as Umbrella Man, a shadowy figure some researchers believed they could make out on a nearby, grassy knoll, who came to be called Badge Man, and others besides. Most of these figures were eventually tracked down, questioned, and folded into the historical record with mundane explanations. The Umbrella Man, for instance, would come forward decades later and explain his prop had nothing to do with the assassination at all. The Babushka Lady is the rare case among them that was never resolved that way. She was seen, she was filmed repeatedly by multiple unconnected cameramen, and then she simply was never found. As the shots rang out and the plaza dissolved into screaming, ducking, people throwing themselves to the ground or scrambling for cover, one woman remained standing, upright, composed, camera raised to her face, seemingly filming the entire event as it unfolded around her. She wore a tan or light brown knee-length overcoat, a headscarf tied beneath her chin, in a style associated with older Eastern European women, and possibly sunglasses. Investigators and journalists who studied the footage in the years that followed gave her a nickname that stuck permanently, the Babushka Lady, after the Russian word for grandmother, used loosely for the headscarf she wore. What makes her genuinely significant, rather than just a curious detail in the background of someone else's film, is her position. According to researchers who've mapped her movements across the available footage frame by frame, she appears to first surface on the pavement near the entrance to the Dallas County building as the motorcade made its initial approach, standing to the president's right, for her to reappear later on the opposite side of the vehicle's path. As she does in subsequent footage, she would have needed to physically cross Houston Street in the gap between the motorcade passing and the fatal shots, a detail some researchers have used to argue there may in fact have been 2 different women in a similar coat and scarf that day, rather than one woman on the move, though the more widely accepted reading is that it's the same person repositioning herself for a better view. From there, she is tracked crossing Elm Street and taking up a position on the grass near the now infamous grassy knoll, which would have given her one of the most direct front-facing views of the president's vehicle at the exact moment of the fatal shots. The last confirmed images of her show her walking east along Elm Street sometime after the shooting had already happened, camera still apparently in hand, disappearing from the frame and, effectively, from history. If her camera was rolling continuously through that moment, researchers have argued for decades that her footage could have offered a clearer, more complete angle than Zapruder's own film, which was shot from the side and partially obstructed by a highway sign at the critical instant. She appears in the Zapruder film itself, around frame 285, though her own camera obscures her already blurry face even there. She turns up again in Marie Muchmore's film, standing behind a bystander named Charles Brame and his young son, and in Orville Nix's footage as well. 3 separate, unconnected cameramen, 3 separate rolls of film, all catching the same unidentified woman in the same unmistakable coat and scarf. She never came forward. In the days and weeks after the assassination, the FBI and Secret Service made public appeals for exactly this kind of material, and dozens of ordinary Dallas residents did step forward with their photographs and home movies, Zapruder among them. The Babushka Lady did not. She was never interviewed. Her camera, if it ever existed as investigators believed it did, was never logged into any official evidence file. Investigators scoured the available footage for any clue to her identity, zooming in on her posture, her build, the cut of her coat, and came up with nothing conclusive. Her face is obscured in every surviving frame, either by the angle, the distance, or her own raised camera. In some frames, her stance has struck researchers as unusually broad and upright for a woman of that era in that kind of coat, fueling decades of speculation about who, or even what, she really was. The lack of an answer created a vacuum, and for over 60 years, that vacuum has been filled with theories of every conceivable flavor. Some researchers have speculated she may have been an intelligence operative of some kind, deliberately positioned to document the event for reasons that had nothing to do with amateur curiosity. Others, leaning into the Cold War backdrop of the era and the Russian-style scarf that gave her her nickname, have floated the idea of a Soviet connection, though no evidence has ever tied her to any foreign government. Still others have offered a more mundane, if slightly macabre, explanation that she may have been carrying binoculars rather than a camera, which would neatly explain why no footage from her was ever found, because there may never have been any to find. A handful of researchers have even questioned whether the figure was a woman at all, pointing to a notably wide, upright stance, visible in some frames that struck them as unusual for a woman in a full-length trench coat and dress in 1963, speculation that has never been substantiated by anything beyond the ambiguity of the footage itself. There's a small, oddly specific detail that researchers have used to argue against the most mundane possible explanation, that she was simply dressed for the weather. Dallas had seen rain that morning, and a handful of other women in the plaza that day are visible wearing headscarves for exactly that reason. But the rain had cleared by around 10 o'clock, and the shooting didn't happen until well past noon, over 2 hours later, in what witnesses across the board described as a bright, clear Dallas afternoon. Whatever her reason for the scarf and the heavy coat, staying dry doesn't appear to have been it. None of these explanations has ever been confirmed. All of them remain, formally, speculation. The story took what looked like its long-awaited resolution in 1970, when a Texas woman named Beverly Oliver came forward at a religious revival meeting and told a Kennedy assassination researcher that she was the Babushka Lady. According to Oliver's account, she had filmed the assassination using a Yashica Super 8 camera from close range, only for 2 men identifying themselves as FBI agents to confiscate the camera before she could develop the film, promising to return it within 10 days. She said she never heard from them again, and admitted she never pushed the matter further at the time, out of fear that doing so might draw attention to marijuana she'd been carrying that day. Her account was compelling enough that it was later dramatized in Oliver Stone's 1991 film, JFK. It did not hold up well under scrutiny. day. Researchers pointed out that the Yashica Super 8 camera model Oliver described did not exist on the commercial market until years after 1963, a discrepancy she attempted to explain by claiming she'd been given an experimental pre-release model by a well-connected friend, though she could later recall no manufacturer's markings on the device to support that claim. More damaging still, witnesses and researchers who compared Oliver's own physical description at the time, by her own account, a slender 17-year-old, against the woman visible in the Dealey Plaza films, described a notably older, stockier figure, closer to her late 30s or 40s, with darker hair visible beneath the scarf than Oliver's own natural coloring. Conspiracy researcher John McAdams, among others, examined Oliver's claims point by point and concluded they didn't survive comparison with the physical evidence. Author Vincent Bugliosi, in his own exhaustive study of the assassination, noted that Oliver had never demonstrated to most researchers' satisfaction that she'd even been in Dealey Plaza that day at all. Oliver's account grew more elaborate with each retelling over the following decades. By the time she co-authored a 1994 memoir on the subject, her story had expanded well beyond the original camera confiscation, eventually including claims that she'd personally known nightclub owner Jack Ruby, the man who would go on to kill Lee Harvey Oswald in police custody, and that Ruby had introduced her to Oswald himself at a party where Oswald had allegedly described his own ties to the CIA. None of these additional claims came with any corroborating evidence whatsoever, and most serious researchers now treat them as embellishment rather than fact. Oliver's version of events proved culturally durable regardless, forming the basis for a scene in Oliver Stone's 1991 film JFK, in which a fictionalized version of her meets the real-life investigator Jim Garrison in a Dallas nightclub, a scene that likely did more to cement her claim in the public imagination than any of the original 1970 interviews ever did. With Oliver's claim largely discredited, the Babushka Lady's true identity reverted to exactly where it had sat for the 7 years before Oliver ever came forward. Unknown. No one else has ever come forward with a credible, physically consistent claim to being her. No camera matching her description has ever surfaced in any archive, private collection, or auction house in over 60 years of intense researcher interest in anything even remotely connected to Dealey Plaza. The Federal Assassination Records Review Board, established in the 1990s specifically to declassify and release government material related to the case, heard testimony related to the Oliver claim in 1994. Testimony that, if anything, only reinforced how unresolved the underlying mystery remained, even after decades of official document releases. Even more recent research efforts, including a 2023 book examining the case through the lens of Cold War-era female intelligence operatives, have continued to revisit her as an open thread worth investigating rather than a case anyone considers closed. What makes this particular loose thread so unusual compared to the sprawling web of competing JFK theories is how narrow and specific it is. This isn't a debate over ballistics trajectories or grainy frame-by-frame analysis of a shadow on a fence line, the kind of dispute where reasonable people can look at the same evidence and reach different conclusions forever. It's a simple, binary question. Did a woman standing in the best possible position to film the assassination actually capture it on film? And if she did, where did that footage go? 6 decades of research, 4 independent films that caught her in frame, a discredited imposter, and a federal review board's worth of formal inquiry have answered almost every other question about that day in exhaustive, sometimes excessive detail and have never definitively answered that one. Compare her to the other unresolved figures of Dealey Plaza. The Umbrella Man eventually came forward decades later and offered an account, however strange, of exactly why he was standing there with an open umbrella on a clear day. Badgeman was ultimately explained by most serious photographic analysts as an artifact of shadow and film grain rather than an actual second gunman. One by one, the plaza's background mysteries have been chipped away by better technology, persistent researchers, or simply time convincing someone to finally talk. The Babushka Lady is the one figure who never got her moment of resolution, good or bad. No confession, no debunking, no closure, just a woman who stood still while everyone else ran, and then quietly walked away from the most photographed few seconds in American history without ever telling anyone what she saw through that viewfinder. She is still there, frozen in someone else's film, forever raising a camera to her face at the exact moment history turned. Whether that camera ever actually captured anything, whether the footage was lost to time, discarded as unimportant, quietly taken by someone with the authority to ask for it, or never existed in the first place, remains one of the only parts of November 22nd, 1963 that has never been resolved by ballistics, blueprints, or an act of Congress. Who was the woman in Dealey Plaza who didn't run? And if she really was filming 60 years on, where did that film actually go?